everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration tool custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. Today, we're talking with Jamal Coleman, lead VFX artist at Lightforge Games. Jamal takes us through some highlights of his career, including working at Blizzard on World of Warcraft. We then try something new to the show where I pitch a game idea to Jamal and ask him to break down how he would approach the game through each phase of development from a visual effects standpoint. This is a lot of fun to get some perspective on how Jamal works on his own and with other developers across departments. I think you're really going to enjoy this one, and without further ado, here's Jamal Coleman. It's going to be a weird question, but what's the thing that sort of annoys you the most working in visual effects right now, from like a technical standpoint?
The first question I always ask when joining a project is, what's the min spec? What target are we trying to hit? Mm-hmm. I've worked on so many projects now. I'm at my 7th studio, so I've hopped around a lot.
How many years?
A little over 10. I think I'm in my 10th year right now. Yeah, I started in 2012. Early 2012 at Turbine. But yeah, I would say just like what are we aiming for? A lot of studios, a lot of projects that I've worked at tend to aim like really high, especially in the beginning, and they end up just racking up the tech debt. When I joined Proletariat, actually, not to throw anyone there under the bus, Damon's an awesome art director. He created some like gorgeous stuff, but the first thing I did, I had a lot of experience in performance optimization. That's the first question I started asking. I noticed the environment team was like doing a lot of performance passes because we were about to ship on Switch, and I started asking the same questions to the art director and then the person who ended up taking lead. So yeah, I think it's really, really important to just keep that in mind. However, it's always like a balance of how do you make sure that you're not killing momentum while also staying technically responsible. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky thing, scope creep, because I think in the beginning, coming to the table with a ton of ideas is great, right? I'd rather have a lot more ideas than too few ideas. But once you get going, that whole vision should be scoped down to the point where it's like, okay, we can do this with the team we have. It's a tough thing to really nail down. There's not like a great answer for it. But the team has to know at some point what is the actual scope of this game. They can't exceed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a big proponent of helping artists understand what affects performance. When I was at Big Huge Games, I was one of the only, me and one other guy who were really like the technically minded artists, and there was not a lot of communication happening before I got there with the engineering department. And just making sure you're talking to your graphics engineer saying, hey, what's the problem here? Do we have perf reports? How are we even doing on our min spec? So that we don't completely bloat, especially these days when there's so many awesome features you can throw in. We have grass in our game that the art director was recently asking just today, like, hey, why do we pull this out again? And I wasn't involved in that decision, but I was like, probably performance. It's probably something we just need to revisit depending on what our min spec is.
That was the funniest thing to me in school. We were doing a big like senior project. And we worked on it for 9 months, and it was a big 3D RPG game, and we definitely did not do a good job with scope creep. And we brought in all these animators, but they were from film animation, and they didn't get that make these rigs for the game engine. We were using Unity, and they were like putting all these bones in there. They were making characters. They were making rigs for film. And it was just like the performance was just so awful. And it was like, oh my God, these guys don't know what they're doing. And it wasn't really their fault. But we did explain like, hey, this is a game engine. This isn't, you aren't just doing this in Maya,
Yeah, we're real time.
Yeah, like things have to be performant. Can you give a more specific example of something like that happening in the past?
Yeah, I was at when I joined Big Huge Games, we were working on this game. It ended up getting canceled, unfortunately, after soft launch. But our min spec was something like our iOS min spec was a mobile game, so it was all 2D sprites. It was kind of done like Clash of Clans, kind of like similar to their pipeline. Nothing was 3D in it. yeah, I started asking the questions of, how are we doing on our mint spec? And no one on the art team knew. The art director, he came to me and he was like, "Hey, since you're asking these questions, do you mind just interfacing with engineering?" And that's kind of where I learned a lot about performance optimization and like what we need to do. I connected with this amazing engineer, JT, and he, God, I bugged him so much, multiple times a day. I had him just like explain to me, like I was 5, just like what exactly does transparency do, and how is it rendered? What do we need to do? Because that was our major problem. All the sprites were rendered on transparency to get better edges. Um, and that was a big no-no, especially
Crush
for.
performance, I'm guessing.
Oh, it was awful. So we did a lot to optimize that, and a few other things, making sure that environment assets were all batching in the same draw call. Um, uh, yeah, getting things on texture atlases so that we could use the same material, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I did the same thing with effects. I was the only effects artist there, so I managed that whole pipeline and made sure that it was the most optimized. It was a lot of learning. It was a lot of kind of going back and forth and finding out what we needed, uh, and also how to like push the current assets we had, sharing everything and making. I had like one VFX texture asset that Atlas that I used for like almost everything in the game, and I added like piecemeal to it, but I was always afraid to add to it because I didn't want to fill it up completely. So I always left a little bit of space. That was my one of my most proudest like technical achievements. Just like we went from, I think the FPS was somewhere around like 12 FPS, and by the time we were all done, and it was a collaborative effort. I'm not saying it was all me. I had a large part to play on the art side. The art director did all the UI optimization, worked with engineers there too. But by the end, we got it to 30 FPS, which is the goal.
Wow. And that's on iPhone 6.
Yeah, it was an iPhone 6, and I think we had like a Galaxy S7 or something, like it was something pretty old for the time even. So
Yeah, so that must have been going from like not the best pipeline in the world to a much better one. What do you think makes like a well-defined pipeline from a VFX standpoint?
that's a good question. Setting early the goals of the project, the naming conventions, the what are we going to be using, what are we building for, how much is going to be shared. I'm going through that right now. I just joined Lightforge, and I'm going through. There's a lot of like, the third party store assets that they were using to like build stuff up before I got there, because I'm the first effects artist there, and I'm going through and just cleaning house. I don't want anything in there that's a store asset, so that I know exactly how it's built, and I'm building it with my specific um, project goals in mind. Setting up material functions how I like them to be used in the most general way, and also the textures in like more of a shared capacity. It's something I learned on working on Smite at high res. My effects lead there, he was awesome. It was a pretty robust system when I had joined. It was right before launch when I joined, but there was a big shared library that the artists were encouraged to use. I was mid-level there, so I was kind of like, he taught me a lot that I still use to this day. Not necessarily in terms of performance, more in terms of pipeline and just making sure that things are set up.
And then from like an organizational standpoint, how are you like if you're setting up that pipeline, how are you making sure everybody knows what's going on? And are you like collaborating with people on the pipeline's creation in and of itself?
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration. It's something that it's funny you asked that, because it's dealing with that today and the past week. I'm going through these third-party assets and trying to clean house, and I'm noticing like environment is using stuff from these random effects packs, and I mean that's going to be common when you're putting things together in like an early phase of a game. Um, but all of the art leads are kind of aligning on like, okay, how should we use this going forward? What are our common naming conventions so that we know what is being used for effects or environment? I kind of go with the mindset of, I don't want any other department using anything from effects, because things might change. I might have a noise texture 1, 2, 3, but maybe later down the line I decide to channel pack them, and if I do that, the RGB channels end up changing, and whatever environment is using them for ends up breaking. So I'm like, I want to make sure that any of that stuff is solely designed for effects and not really being used. Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of collaboration between design and also uh, production has a huge role in terms of making sure everyone's on the same page and making sure that we are communicating effectively and planning effectively, prioritizing as well.
Yeah, and I got to think too that you have to be working with technical artists and the engineering team as well. What's that like with sort of the cross departmental communication? How often are you guys talking? Because you're all remote, right, at Lightforge?
Yeah, Lightforge is a fully remote studio. We don't have a studio, which is kind of awesome. It's one of the things that attracted me to them. I feel like it's like almost like a company of the future. It's like they got established. I think it was a couple of years ago, like when the pandemic hit, or right before. So they had to make some decisions, as far as I understand, the history of the studio. But yeah, it's a awesome studio. We are all remote, and we also are all asynchronous as well. So we have people working on other sides of the globe. So people in Japan and in Europe. And all along the US as well. We rely heavily on this app called Notion, which is
Oh yeah, we use Notion. We love Notion.
Notion is so good, especially coming from Confluence. I'm like, oh, this is so easy.
It's like the emotional rescue from Confluence. Confluence is a nightmare. Notion,
Yeah,
you can do pretty much everything on Notion that you absolutely need to have from like Confluence and Jira combined. Like Jira is a bloated mess to me. It's like Notion's like
yeah.
the perfect. Is one of the better organizational apps I've ever used. I'm not related to Notion at all, but we are a customer at Mudstack. So
Yeah. I found out about it when I joined the studio, and I've been really happy. It's helped collaboration a lot. We have one of our founders, Dan, is kind of our Notion guru, and he set up a system that just is really well organized. All of our meeting notes are in there. It's easy to collaborate. Our specs, our design docs, our VFX style guides, art style guides. It's all in there. So that helps us collaborate really well, especially at this like asynchronous style. So you're not any Slack messages that we get, like you're not expected to like jump at them whenever you get them, because people in Europe might be sending them, at your like 2 a.m.
right. That's cool because that's still going to be tough though to be able to make sure everybody's on the same page. One, you're working remote. Two, you're in sometimes completely different time zones.
I think it poses a huge collaboration struggle, but it's not. It's one that we like gladly face as a company. Like it's known that yeah, asynchronous is not like as easy as being in a studio, all like jumping in together, working next to each other. But this is like the way of the future, Like I think more studios are going to go towards this model, especially over the pandemic, having to be remote. I have moved, so I have little kids. My oldest is in fourth grade. He's been in 5 school districts already because I would move around from company to company. I worked for a lot of a lot of startups that didn't have the most success, and so I kind of like jumped around a bunch in my early career. And if this was the case 5 years ago, then we'd stay in one place, and he'd be able to benefit from not not moving around. So yeah, I love the flexibility. People always ask me like, "Are you in the military?" I'm like, "No, I'm just just a game dev." So
That's the thing I really like now. I guess a gift from the pandemic is that it seems like there's a good number of new studios being born, right? That are comprised of all these AAA veterans. Lightforge for you guys, Crop Circle Games is another company that has a lot of AAA developers that were at big companies like Naughty Dog and things like that have come together to make a new remote studio. And I'm really excited to see what what you guys and what they do and others create, because you're right, this is a new way of working, and it's being embraced. And it's also giving people the freedom, I think, to kind of live their lives on their own terms, still do what they love, but do it in almost a less pressure-filled environment. But it's a lot of really talented people coming together to work on the stuff they love to do.
yeah, totally. There are a lot of studios I think still struggling with during the pandemic. No one was moving, but they still had to hire. So studios like Blizzard and Riot and Proletariat. When I started there, it was during the pandemic, kind of the height of the pandemic, and the plan was like, no, we are going to return to studio. So I had to move back to Boston, where my wife's family is originally from. But um, we were in Maryland at the time for another studio for Big Huge Games, and I quit there and I went to Proletariat, and the deal was like move back. If it had been like 2 or 3 months later, I would have just stayed in Maryland. I'd probably be there today. Probably have bought a house during the pandemic. But it was like this instability of like, well, will I be able to find studios? And that's why we moved to Southern California too. I ended up leaving Proletariat after a little bit less than a year, and I went to Blizzard. And the idea there was too, like, we're going to be returning hybrid. Meanwhile, they're hiring people that are remote, that are kind of negotiating this like fully remote. All these studios are, and then they're faced with the problem of, do we force everybody to come to our like $1 million campus, or do we let them have the freedom to work remotely? Because ideal, the old standard was, let's work and collaborate in person. So it's because that's just easier. And I think it is way easier. You have to actually put in a good deal of effort to make remote work, and then also more effort to make like something like asynchronous work. I don't think it's that hard, and I think Lightforge is proving that it's totally possible. And I have a lot of confidence it will be the new standard in a few years.
It's a new challenge, but it's not insurmountable, and it really, I think, creates a much better work-life balance. I have a hard time, I think, with the remote work style because I do like being around people. Like, that's the biggest thing that I kind of miss from having an office and being able to collaborate with people in person. But there are a ton of benefits, and if it makes people's lives easier and you don't have to commute. Like, if you live in Southern California, you know how bad the traffic is there. I live in Atlanta. The traffic's not as bad, but pretty damn close. There's just so many benefits, especially if you're a parent as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about Blizzard. Our CEO Jordan is a huge Blizzard fan. Anything at Blizzard that you're super proud of, something that you worked on, a specific title that you can really hang your hat on and be like, that was really good. We did really good work there.
Yeah, I worked on 2 projects when I was there. I worked on ArcLight Rumble, which had a different internal name, so I'm trying to train myself to use that name. And I left after about a year to work on World of Warcraft. Both projects filled with like amazing people, excellent artists, really easy to collaborate, and yeah, I'm proud of both projects. I worked on, as right as Dragonflight was like starting to ramp up in terms of effects. So yeah, I'm really proud of the work we did there. I had the pleasure of working under Sarah Carmody, who I've admired her work for a long time in VFX circles. She's incredible. Anyone that knows anything about effects probably has seen her work. And just an awesome team over there. And yeah, ArcLight Rumble was a pleasure to work on too. I learned a lot from Thomas, the lead VFX artist over there, and it was cool to see how Blizzard was approaching mobile. The game has been announced; it hasn't been like fully released yet, but I can't wait until it gets released so that I can show off some of my work and also play the game, because it was fun when I joined over there. But they've added a bunch of features that I'm excited to see once it's fully released.
Cool. Is there any pressure that comes with working at a company like Blizzard or a title like World of Warcraft, where there's just millions of fans and have very high expectations? They care very much about the world that's been created, or is it just like, this is my job, I'm doing it, I'm not thinking about that stuff?
I think, yeah, there's an immense amount of pressure. I think just the whole studio is kind of structured in a way that like decisions do need to be made carefully. It's not going to be as rapid as some of the smaller studios that I've worked at. I was so proud to work on any of those titles. I still am. It's cool when you see someone on the street and you're wearing, your Blizzard hoodie or whatever, and they comment. That happened to me quite a few times, and it's nice to like meet people that are like really passionate about the game.
From a cultural standpoint, what's really important for you, either at places that you worked that you enjoyed, or maybe where you are now, or even thinking 10 years in the future? What is like the numero uno thing you're looking for when you're like, I'm coming to work here, this is why I'm coming to work here? Because I imagine too, it's like, there probably is an allure of like, it's a cool project to work on, but it would suck if the if the people you're working with don't share your values or you don't jive with them. So interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think you hit it on the head. The number one thing I look for is just people fit. I've interviewed at many studios, and it's kind of like the number one question that I have to ask now is kind of like from working after the Blizzard lawsuit and all that stuff, and kind of being around while that was happening. The number one question I ask is like, what was your studio's reaction during that time? Because it's going to be really telling to hear not only how they approached communicating, because anyone that thinks that anything that happened to Blizzard, was it a year or two ago? Was it just last year? God.
Yeah.
Anyone think that that's isolated to Blizzard is super wrong. It's an industry problem, and it's something that the limelight got shown on Blizzard during what was going on. But that's what I'm most interested in finding out is like, how did studios react? And I've gotten some really good answers. I've also gotten some like really big red flags that I decided like not to pursue studios because of those answers. But it's the people. It's not only the quality of artists, but just do I like working with these people? Can I see myself like collaborating with them easily? Are they kind? Like it's I have no interest in any sort of like frat boy culture or like big egos. All the people I worked with at Blizzard just were the kindest. I mean, working Sarah's entire team, that entire effects team, it was really hard to decide to leave because I absolutely loved working with each one of them. That's the number one thing I look for in any team that I join is are these people of good moral character and easy to collaborate with. And I found an amazing team at Lightforge. They're all absolutely incredible people and super talented. I kind of search for that home feeling, and that's what I found here too. So
why did you leave Blizzard?
The biggest thing that contributed to me leaving was the tools. World of Warcraft is a title that was in development. Started development. If I have my history right, it started development in 20th century. So
yeah.
putting that into perspective, like the tool set has gotten better. There have been improvements. But for me, I really missed working in like a really fresh modern tool set, frankly, with Unreal. I've worked in Unity. I've worked in a lot of proprietary engines, but I really love the agility of Unreal. It's really designed for content creators. For VFX, it's unparalleled. I mean, especially now with the new effect system with Niagara, it's incredibly flexible. I first started using Unreal at high res, and then I went to another company using Unity and kind of went back and forth through the projects. And Unity is very programmer centric and not super artist friendly. You can create beautiful art in both, but I think you just have less tools that you actually need in terms of in-engine with Unreal.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're getting to the portion of the show where we're gonna dive into the hypothetical. We're gonna test Jamal's resolve in a way. Can't really talk about what he's working on with Lightforge. So what we're going to do is sort of pose a hypothetical game to Jamal and talk, and then we're going to walk through like how he would start creating some effects for this game. So I had this idea for a game. If I ever go back to the industry, I'd like to try and make this. But it's very much in the vein of kind of a Flower or Journey. It's basically you play as a baby turtle. You're born. You're on the sand. You crawl out of your egg. You get in the sand. You avoid predators. You get into the water, and at that point, it's sort of your life. You're dealing with the elements, with the current in the ocean. You're dealing with predators in the ocean. And you sort of just follow this turtle's life, and it's just totally in nature. It's kind of similar, I guess, to Stray without the robots and whatnot. So if I were to come to you with this project, right, and we're talking about, okay, we're creating this fully immersive underwater 3D world, pretty lifelike. Where would you start with that in terms of especially just like movement in the water and the effects in the water and shaders and things like that? Where are we starting here?
All right, so the first question is, are we in the water or are we outside the water? 'Cause
We
those are
start
two
out. We
different
start
things.
outside the water. That's sort of where the opening would be, and then we go into the
Start
water.
outside.
Yeah, and then we go into the water, and then we don't really leave the water after that.
Okay, yeah. I'd say the water surface shader is probably going to be seen a lot. I'd probably dive in and make sure that I'm aligned with the art direction. The nice thing about effects is that it is there. I have an animator friend who I say he hates this analogy too. I say like if we're cooking a steak, like like everything that comes before it's like the meat. I'm making the sauce. Like I
Yeah.
need to make sure I need to make sure what we're making so that I can plus up the flavor.
Yeah.
So I need to see the art style. I need to see the game, like if there's an ability system or what the actual specs are. But in terms of the art, yeah, I would probably. It sounds like you need some water splashes. You need a really good water surface shader. Um, Probably need some sand effects as well, kind of
Yeah.
like maybe those footprints or like some splashing around in the sand. Um, and then it's like the rest of the journey there is like what is the turtle getting into? Um, but yeah, it's funny. I have to do a water shader for our project, and I've been thinking a lot about it and thinking, are we going more like realistic surface ripples and light reflection, or are we going to go something more towards Sea of Thieves, which is like still illustrative but like very realistic movement? Um, I love that water shader. So the first thing I like to do when tackling a problem like making a new water shader is just like look at as much reference as I can, start building some mood boards, seeing what I like about certain types of things, and then going in and starting to break it down. Yeah, it's good. This is actually like planning for a task I need to do. So this,
Okay,
this
good.
is great.
Glad I could help you. Yeah,
Yeah,
so let's say we're shooting for more realistic. We're shooting for very realistic, as realistic as we can get. We can say we're in Unreal.
yeah.
And you have how big's your VFX team?
For this turtle game, starts off as one.
As one, okay. But for you
Yeah,
guys right now, how big's your VFX team?
also one.
Also one. All right, so this is great. So we're
Yeah,
starting off with
I, I'm
one.
at,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm actually the process. Like we're in pre-production right now, so the process for deciding how big to build a team is I need to work heavily with design and with production to make sure that I understand the needs and the future needs going as far as possible. Like if we have an ability system, what are the specifics of that, and give me any environment needs that we have, and um, trying to make that as modular as possible so that we can like kind of
Reuse
run
stuff.
with the effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, reuse stuff, and
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I do plan on growing my team either through outsourcing or through hires, internal hires. There's so many awesome new effects artists coming up, like through the VFX Apprentice program and people just learning on their own. But also some really awesome outsourcing studios that are popping up too. So I got a lot of good options. Yeah, we're doing the exact same thing here, starting off small and then understanding where we have to grow.
Right. So let's say I don't really have any. The turtle doesn't really have any abilities. It's sort of like a game of life and death. If you get killed, sort of deal. Which obviously changes the way the game's going to be designed. So you don't want people to get killed too early and then have to start all over again.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like a kind of insane decision in the first place. But I wouldn't anticipate it being any more than like a couple hours.
Here's a question for you. You say
Yeah.
kill. Whenever an effects artist hears the word kill,
Yeah.
you gotta ask the
You
question,
get
what's
very
the
excited.
rating?
Yeah.
Are we gonna throw out turtle guts and blood, or do you want to keep this?
I think we go rated M for mature. We can get oil spills as well off of ships. Like, you know, if you get exposed to too much oil, that could damage you. Storms could create torrential currents, things like that. It'd be really cool to have like a dynamic like current system.
All right, now we're getting feature creep. This is good. It's good to know what we have to plan for, and then we can decide what to cut later. Yeah. No, if it's more realistic too, I find realistic stuff to be a bit easier just because we have so much reference. Like if I I don't have to go online. I just go out, to the ocean to see what the surface shader is doing there. Maybe I watch some GDC talks on people building stuff like that. Um, but my eye is like going out in nature, taking hikes, taking pictures, and even I've taken like photos of cracks on the sidewalk before and used those in game.
Hmm.
So um, usually it's with the stylized stuff you have to change it pretty drastically, but um, yeah, the realistic stuff ends up not that it's easy, but I find that to be like kind of an easier understood target.
Right.
So
And then I like your research process too, where you're going out and actually looking at stuff, not just doing online and create a mood board. I always like creating mood boards for any visual project I'm working on, mood boards, storyboards, etc., to define what the art direction is going to be and things that we can actually reference, especially for something where you're dealing with like real life animals and things like that.
yeah, look up references. I mean references for like the blood explosion of the turtle. It's weird, right? Because some people will be really offended to hear this stuff, but I love seeing like the blood effects in game. I mean, if it's fake, it's fake. It's great.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
my wife and I are watching stuff on TV, and I'm always like, oh man, that makeup looks so good, and she's like seeing a carcass being ripped open or something like that, and,
Right.
and she's like, I can't watch this, and I'm like, but it looks like this is great reference, but I know it's fake. I
Yeah.
never want to see that kind of stuff in real life, but the makeup and you can at least admire the craft.
What other sort of effects are you looking for like some maybe of the fish and whatnot, like schools of fish, sharks, things like that? Sort of more the same with like references and mood boards and things like that, or what are you starting to think about there?
I start going to what does design intend to do with the fish? Like, do we have a
Hmm.
shark that poses a threat
Yes.
that maybe has like a bite,
Hmm.
and if they bite you, there's probably some like underwater blood effects, stuff like that. You probably need to see like some bubbles if it rushes as well.
Right.
Uh, any fish that have any sort of like emissive qualities too. That's more of a character thing though. Um, let's see what else. I mean, what it would just be kind of like brainstorming. What could the fish do? If we're going more realistic, there's probably not like a bubble shield effect, but
No.
that's where
No.
my head goes to. Like we need to plan for that sort of thing.
And that's another thing too. Would be like a question for whoever would be designing this would be like, what sort of UI is there? What sort of UI is there,
Mhm.
and how are we guiding the player through the vast ocean? It'd be very easy to get lost. Um,
Yeah.
Potentially if you don't have a map or you don't have any way to sort of navigate, like the total, completely realistic immersion that I'm talking about would probably be broken a little bit by just being able to not handhold the player, but give them enough to know where they're going, where effects are created in that sense. Do you have experience creating effects for things like that?
Yeah, I've done some UI effects. It's interesting when you say that stuff. I start to think like, what kind of screen overlays do we need also? Which is just it's going to indicate more information to the character of like, is your health low? Maybe if you're going to a zone that you shouldn't be, the screen starts to darken. Which would be kind of between a UI, I guess a UX. You'd want to like make sure to talk to your designers about that. Like maybe something like that starts to happen where your vision starts to go, and then you blink out and you have to reload maybe in the playable area. Um, yeah, UI effects are really heavily used on mobile games. I have not done a whole lot of UI effects in Unreal. We actually had an amazing UI team at Proletariat who would do all their stuff in After Effects in terms of how it should look and how it should go. So the effects team didn't touch that at all. The engineers would go implement what they designed. As far as I understand it, I didn't have a play in that, but yeah, it depends on the needs of the project. I'm sure that there are people in Unreal doing UI effects, and in fact, we're going to have to do something like that too. But I just don't have the experience of doing that in Unreal. Done it a lot in Unity though. Unity is like more geared towards mobile games. So mobile games have a lot of like kind of those dopamine effects. Like, hey, you open this chest, boom, this pretty magical sparkle to make you want to buy more chests or stuff like that. So there's a lot of that.
And then at what point, right? If we've gotten to this point where we are starting to get a feel for, we know the art direction, we have a decent idea of the design, like where, and then I assume you're probably figuring out what the pipeline is and things like that, working with art team and the engineers and whatnot. When do we start seeing actual effects come into the game? Like, let's say we're still trying to find the fun of it in the sense that we're still prototyping, but we know what we want to make. Are you still trying to figure out the overall look and what you're with the art team and figuring out the effects, or are you waiting for design to come up with a good enough prototype so you can start testing what you've been working on? What's that process like?
My job at this phase of development is to support design with whatever they need. So temporary effects for anything ability related, or even environment related. Like you can do first passes on that surface shader, maybe get something in. I'm not opposed to buying assets from the asset store if it proves useful to design as well. Just to like before you have your pipeline started, you're not going to have a whole lot of time to make everything for them. So I do like creating templates just so that they have something available, and then it's that process helps out as well to kind of help define what the needs of the project are as well, because design is also trying to figure out do we need A, B, and C, or can we
Right.
cut that, or do we need maybe A and then A1, A1, A2, A3? So trying to figure out the needs of the project in that way is definitely supporting design. VFX usually doesn't get involved super early in the project. I have been able to get involved really early at a couple of studios, and the kind of work that I did there was more of a support role. Like I'm helping set up material standards and just like things for them to play around with, different material functions they use as well. I like being involved as early as possible, but it can also be frustrating because I'm not like making the polished effects that I used to. When you're working on an existing game, especially something that's like a live service, something like Smite or Infinite Crisis back in the day when I worked on that, you're just like you're getting a kit, you're getting requests from design of what you need to actually work on. You break all that down, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to work on this projectile, and this impact, and this cast, and this ultimate, and you're planning your 2 weeks of development like on your sprint, and that can be frustrating from like an early standpoint. That's why I also don't like that's why we're not bloating our team with extra VFX hires, because I'm like I need to clean up the house and make sure that I have exactly what I want you to be working on, um, especially if it's like an associate or mid-level candidate. Like it's easier from that standpoint to bring them on later on once your list of requests are in.
We actually start transitioning into when you can actually do all the effects and whatnot. How collaborative, ideally, would it be for you for either the game director or the designers or both, or the art director, to come in and really be more hands on what you're doing? Do you like to get in your kitchen and cook for a minute and then show what you got, or are you taking more notes from people before you get started, or is it a little bit of both?
I don't believe in like gatekeeping the effects like feedback process. I think anybody has valid opinions. We all, anybody that has seen or played a video game, I think, or not, even just you know, go to an art museum, you can tell whether or not you like a painting, right? So, um, my wife is not an artist. I get her feedback all the time. I like to be as collaborative as I can. Um, what I don't like is being micromanaged. I don't want to be told like this is how you're going to be solving this particular problem from like before I even try to solve it. Unless that's helpful in the process of like understanding how the pipeline is happening. Um, yeah, it depends on the art director. Some art directors want a heavy hand in effects, and because it impacts other things. Proletariat, Damon was the one who set the standard for all the effects, so he jumped in and designed like exactly what he was looking for. It was a very specific, really awesome art direction. This other startup that I was at, it was more about like keeping up with the project demands to make sure we were meeting milestones, and less so about like crafting a really really careful vision, um, but still obviously making art in the best fashion that we could. Yeah, I'm flexible. I think my ideal is having autonomy and the trust, which I get a lot of trust here. Glenn Rain is the art director at Lightforge, and he's awesome. He's a great collaborator. He's an amazing artist, and he's easy to collaborate with. He trusts that he doesn't have a lot of effects experience, so he's illustrated some awesome effects, and he supports me wherever I can, and has given me the autonomy to like kind of design the effects pipeline and the vision across the board. Um, I like to, even if he didn't ask me for it, I would want to make sure to get his opinion and buy-in on like, do you think that this is the right direction? Like, here are some options, and that's the kind of work that we've done. Yeah, it's a great pipeline to be in where I am right now. I've been in other departments where there was more micromanagement happening, and just especially if you're coming in as a senior, it's hard to get that stuff like spoon fed to you. It's like I just want to go and start running and just start making stuff. But different teams operate differently, so it's just a matter of figuring out how to navigate the style of direction as well. So and that's an adjustment period.
I like that answer too. It's like you have autonomy, but can still be collaborative. Like I think as long as the definition for the project is pretty well realized at that point, in the sense of this is the art style, this is what we're going for, we kind of understand what we need to do, then that should set everybody up visual side at a minimum to be able to go in and say, okay, we know where we're going to start, we know where we're going, we can work on this for a minute before we show it to anybody, because we know what the project needs, sort of deal.
Yeah, and I also think different environments will be great for different people as well. Some people might like really need that the more hands-on learning experience that I might interpret as micromanagement. So that's all a perception thing too. I like to tell people that a cactus will thrive in the desert, but it'll die in a swamp. So it's like finding the environment that works for you, that you will thrive in, is the key. It's at least for me, it is.
Say we had like 3 years to work on this game. All the pre-production stuff got sort of at least solved to the point where we could get going about somewhere between 3 and 6 months. We have 2.5 years or so to finish this game. What does that look like for you in terms of like the iterative process of what you're creating? What's the day-to-day like? Who are you talking to every day? Things like that.
I think each year starts to look really different. The first year might be building up the project. I think that's the hardest time. Each phase of a project is different, but that first year is building up, and especially effects that comes at the very end of a pipeline. The stress isn't necessarily at the beginning. It's like I'm there to support all of the art departments in any way that I can for my strengths. And no two effects artists are created the same. So it's like some of my strengths are, creating shaders and material functions and organization, performance. And some of that stuff is useful at the beginning of a project. A lot of it is useful at the end. So I'm in more of like a support position, but also trying to plan as much as I can too. So whenever I can get a spare moment from the designers, I want to know, are we accounting for everything? And I'm talking to production a lot too, and making sure that I have everything listed out as best as I can plan it either in Jira or Notion, or a combination of both. But yeah, at year 2 is more like, we start like really going forward with production, and we're in the pipeline, we're creating all the assets, we're doing probably more detailed art reviews, trying to get to that last like 80 to 100% is can take as much time as going from 0 to 80. So year 3 ends up getting to the point where we're starting to panic of like, have we done enough? Do we need to hire more outsourcers? our performance, or we're about to ship. So hopefully performance is something we've already talked about. Typically it's not. Typically that comes at the end, and people either start panicking or delay stuff. I like to handle it as early as possible so that we don't have that panic, but sometimes it's inevitable as well. And then the last year is just making sure everything is buttoned up and good to go, which is often super chaotic, especially for VFX. Usually design ends up creating stuff to like the last minute, right? So you need to work with production to make sure that it has to be like a really, really important ask for design to add something super late, and then do we have enough time to actually implement it and test it and ship it? So that's the balancing act for effects usually comes at the very end.
What about QA in terms of them giving feedback to the work that you're doing? I feel like that's something that's not really discussed when we think of QA. We think of like compliances and gameplay and things like that. But I don't hear a lot about, QA giving feedback on, oh, this effect looks good, this doesn't, blah, blah, blah. How involved is QA in the work that you do?
I think QA is super important. I mean, I treat them as our player base, especially at the beginning, right? So you want QA are tied into the gameplay experience. They're the ones testing it every day. They have way more experience than I do actually playing the game. If I'm making an effect that they're looking at and they're like, this is just weird. I mean, sometimes, especially since QA is not usually roped into art reviews and stuff like that, they may not have the language to put it into terms like that you would in an art review of the focal point here, or the timing, and try to figure out like why it looks weird. But if I'm getting a big flag from anybody in QA that like, hey, this water tornado looks weird, it just I will want to like sit down with them and I'll like try to dig at like, why do you think it looks weird? Like what makes this water tornado different than the other water tornadoes in the other fish games and turtle games that we're competing against. So
Yeah.
or maybe it's just a red flag to be like, okay, we'll take a look at it. Usually the feedback that I've gotten from QA is like, obviously if things are broken, which is super valuable as well. But if things are just not working for like the gameplay experience of like, hey, this hit lingers and lasts for way too long, that's great feedback. I'm like, oh, okay, I should make it snappier, or I should make it more readable. It's usually like from the player experience, because what I have found is that it is, I mean, the hardest people on VFX are going to be the VFX artists. I see stuff that I'm like, oh, I hate that thing that I shipped.
Yeah.
And my wife looks at it and she's like, it looks really good though. Like, what's wrong? Like, it delivers everything you need. And then I point it out and she's like, oh yeah, I don't think anyone's going to care about that. So so it's usually in general with QA, I think it goes to what I was saying before, is that I really try not to gatekeep anyone's feedback, because everybody's opinion should be valid. Uh, there might be some education that I need to provide in terms of like, yeah, we tackled this problem a certain way because of A, B, or C, and that's usually a conversation just of making sure that they understand like why it may be broken that way, if it's intentional. But more often than not, if it's not intentional, it's always good to have that extra feedback.
Do you think QA could be involved earlier, or there could be more like kind of specialty QA people, almost in a sense, where they specialize in a very specific part of the game? Like you have your functional testers already, but you could also say we're just gonna have like a QA artist team or something like that. Do you think that would help, or is that kind of like too much?
I think the problem you run into there is that QA can be really general, and
Yeah.
you don't know if you're hiring. I mean, if you're hiring specifically someone who has that art training and is going to be able to communicate those issues or know what to look out for, they have to be plugged into the department itself and understand what's being built, how it's being built, and that can be challenging to understand, I think, from someone who isn't in the thick of it. Ideally, we're all QAing our own work, looking at it in game before we ship, and doing playtests. I think that's super important as well. I'm not as familiar with QA to really understand if being at the start of a project would be beneficial. I can imagine how it would be. And I'd love to see someone who is really heavily QA experience give that kind of input, because I would absolutely want to listen and find out if that could be useful. I would imagine finding usability issues, and there's going to be a lot of art bugs at the beginning. So everything in game right now is that we have in terms of effects is very temporary. So that's going to be hard to be like, don't write bugs on this broken shader or this broken effect quite yet. But it's also that's going to be a balancing act. We already have a plan for that. I don't want to make sure. I want to make sure that there's not like a ton of Jira bugs that then I have to sift through to be like, oh yeah, we already have a plan for that. So,
right, yeah, that'd probably cross some wires a little bit, but I think it would be an interesting process to see happen. But I totally agree. Like if you were to try that, they would have to if you were to break them up into teams, they would have to be able to specialize in the thing that they are focusing on. Obviously, like that's a huge critical component.
Yeah, but QA is super valuable. I've had only good experiences with my fellow QA departments. So,
well, cool. Thanks for indulging me on that on that little exercise there. That was fun.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hearing how you would go about doing that project at a hypothetical level. That was cool. Any sort of advice for prospective VFX creators, artists who are maybe in school or maybe finished school, trying to build up their portfolio? What's most important? What stands out to you with a VFX portfolio that really makes you be like, okay, we got to hire this person?
When you're creating a VFX portfolio, because the portfolio is also the thing that matters the most. It's not necessarily the experience you have. Of course, that's really helpful. I've seen people with no job experience get amazing positions because their portfolio is great. Look at other portfolios. VFX Apprentice also has a YouTube video on portfolios, I believe. Jason Kaiser has some great resources with portfolio building, but also realtimevfx.com. You can find a lot of that too. I would say put your best work there. If you, I see a lot of people who were either coming out of college or maybe doing stuff after college and putting their student work on their portfolio. And if you're applying to a place like Blizzard or I mean anywhere, and you have a lot of student work that you're maybe like, I was learning during this process, or if it was like after a tutorial, trust me, we've done all the tutorials, we've seen all of that work because it comes out alongside of us. If you see something that's like directly from a tutorial, that stuff might get passed on unless it's your take on it and it's your polish. But if it's like, if it looks exactly like some tutorial that any effects artist has seen, then that stuff usually doesn't fly really well. So I would say put your own spin on it, put your own flavor on it, make it yours if you are doing tutorial stuff. But other than that, like put your best work on there, focus on timing, focusing on the basics is not a bad thing. I would rather see someone with like the best torch fire I've ever seen, or just a really nice polished torch fire, than a mediocre, like complicated suck in explosion, boom, twirly into a tornado with a bird flying, like just something like it's overly complex. Then it's going to be whether or not like you get moved on to either an art test or just get passed on completely. But focusing on the basics is really important, because you can also tell a lot from something as simple as a one single projectile and explosion. You can tell a lot about someone's timing, if they have a sense of timing, what they need to work on, how are their textures, did they paint those textures, put stuff that you have painted. If you if you submit a portfolio and it's like something that's like from a texture library, explicitly say that, because you might get yourself in a weird situation where you get hired onto a team. They're like, we thought you could paint these amazing textures. Why is this not the case anymore? So I think just being fair to yourself and fair to the team that you're applying to, and putting your own work on there is really important too. But yeah, eventually, like you decide throwing your old stuff away, or maybe hiding your student work. I have all that stuff hidden. I hid it like a year into my work because that's what I needed to get my job. And then after that, I was like, oh, I have better stuff now. So I'm going to update my reel every few years and make sure that I have the best stuff that I've had on there. Eventually, I mean, my portfolio is not in a great spot either. It's like a lot of like old work. I can't show anything from Blizzard yet because it's not released. So that stuff's all going to get updated eventually. And of course, the stuff at Lightforge will replace the stuff that I've done at older studios as well. So I also like to keep a reel. I don't think a reel is as important now as it maybe used to be, but I generally stick to like a minute-long reel with not very offensive music, just something very casual because
something that everybody will at least, it's doing its job as a support piece.
Yeah, I like to animate to my music, so I like to have stuff like pop up. It helps with the construction of the reel, I think.
Editing to the music I think is helpful. Make everything work harmoniously. I've seen some reels where people are doing, especially when I was coming out of school, where it's like heavy metal music or something really just like, and it's like you're not putting any thought in how the music's working.
Exactly.
What you've created is like heavy metal to like some fantasy world or something. Bright fantasy world, like some Zelda stuff. Like this doesn't work.
Last thing you want to do is make your hiring manager like rush to the mute button. So
Jamal, thanks so much. This was super informative in a number of ways, and really appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
All right, that's going to wrap up our show this week. We want to thank Jamal for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.